This is Reality Dispatch, written by Jim Mins.
The space rock was dislodged from its orbit by an unseen wave of force that was strong enough to pull it away from its gravitational field. It traveled in a single path away from the grasp of its guiding star, KB1288, and towards the yellow sun that warms our paths. It was over 3,000 kilometers in diameter. In its present form, it would wipe out the existence of a generation of species, were it to collide with a nearby planet. 5 light-years away, a species of Homo erectus held a bone to a larger mass of sandstone and began grinding the material back and forth, leaving behind a shaving of white substance on the rock as he did. It continued this action all morning until the muscles on his forearms ached. He was inspired to produce such a crafted weapon after he had seen a protruding bone from a Miocene epoch that had been hunted by a rival tribe, being ripped from a ribcage and used in a slashing motion against his brother. The animal held the shaft of the bone and scratched away at the tip, and would occasionally stop to observe the sharp point he was creating with every ounce of grind. Manufacturing the material to his desire for use as a weapon of revenge, or perhaps to hunt, either would satisfy. The dark allure of space became the home of the giant rock for many thousands of years, as it drifted in an outward direction to the pull of the nearby star. The gravity was weak and the tug was negligible, but the allure of the direction was what held the rock on as it needed to float somewhere. It gave a sense of closure to its travels, a destination to reward for the endurance of the journey. The boy watched as the woman whom he thought was his mother was led away by a rival tribe and offered as a sacrifice to the newly built structure of the sun gods. His father assured him she was an impostor to be dealt with. The circular pit was multifaceted in both scope and meaning, and its presence in the south of what the future residents would refer to as England would remain a mystery. They would come far and wide to visit Stonehenge, but to the boy it was the place where his dearest was killed, violently, unnecessarily. He bathed the rocks with his tears. Dust and other matter began to peel off the rock as it continued its drift into the orbit of the Milky Way, where it reached the outer layers of the solar system and proceeded onwards. The matter that would retract loosened other pieces of rock and debris. This created a chain reaction, shrinking the size and the girth of the meteor to a more manageable scale, indistinguishable from its brothers and sisters in the known asteroid belt that lay between Mars and Jupiter. There it floated amongst the other rocks in a slow waltz around the sun, in the grip of its orbit but too far away to be noticed. Plato handed the cup back to his friends after having drunk the hemlock, satisfied with his cause and the nobility of his death. He was certain of his intellect and the appraisal his life had given, and confirmed in him that he did not fear the great unknown. Instead, he had welcomed it. His wife pressed her head to his chest for hours, listening intently to the beat of his heart, knowing that it was slowing, knowing that it would ultimately cease beating altogether, knowing how soon such an abrupt and demoralizing outcome would present itself, and ultimately feeling shamed at the man who fathered her children, and the selfishness with which he had made such a brash decision. The unknown force that had caused the rock to drift towards the solar system 4 light-years earlier had made another bid to extract it from its present zone. The nudge ripped through the asteroid belt and dislodged the meteor towards the center, towards the sun. Decimus unsheathed his sword and walked over to the accused who stood before the legion, stripped to nothing but a cloak that he had worn on his wedding day. On the streets of Rome, the commander stood above the accused and granted his request for a soldier's death, pushing the tip of the blade down along the spinal cord where the back meets the neck, just below the hairline. The accused was killed instantly, and the soldiers who had gathered declared the judgment an act of gallantry. The son of a senator who had betrayed the glory of Rome was made an example of, and it was a common commander who had carried out justice. His courage would echo through the streets towards the halls of the Senate. More and more dust peeled off the rock, dramatically reducing its size as it approached the direction of the sun, anticipating a fiery end that would lead to the once enormous entity ultimately appearing no bigger than a bowling ball before the massive star had its way with it. Lee hammered away on the wall next to his colleagues. There were 3 of them on forced duty, and they placed their portion of the bricks into formation. The wall itself was starting to gain significant distance from its origins. It had been decided, on reflection and discussion amongst the villagers, that construction had begun 2 centuries earlier. No one could remember a time when it wasn't there, and when it wasn't being built. Everyone had a family member who was forced to work on the wall. The rock was warmed by the yellow glow as the cold vastness of space slipped away. The warmer it felt, the more dust it emitted. As it came into orbit, the rock took prime position around a series of other natural satellites that were floating too close to the flames, but were strong enough to continue their trajectory. Perhaps one day, they too would burn up in the atmosphere. They held his wrists to the cross and began to nail them down below the thumbs, to allow his body weight to be held up between the wrist bones. The man did not cry out in agony, but accepted his punishment with a silent dignity. The legionary didn't quite grasp as to why so many people had turned out for the execution, a standard operation on the outskirts of Golgotha. "If they're so keen to see us do this, they should show up tomorrow when we do women and children," he laughed to his fellow infantrymen, who chuckled in return. There were rumblings of the man they had nailed to the tree, but they paid them no heed. They never questioned the orders around the subjects of their work. The orbit of the sun sped up the rock, which was free to float at daft angles, without precision or mathematical calculus, to determine an endpoint. There it suspected it would be relegated to another 1,000 centuries of aimless travel. This would be a mistake, for the unknown force that had begun the trajectory of the rock many centuries ago would have other plans. Josiah was escorted onto the train with the barrel of a rifle digging into his skull. He was weeping, but made a point of biting the inside of his mouth, so that the soldiers would not have the satisfaction of knowing how he felt. The one pointing the gun had already known of the boy's past, having been the author of its destruction. He had laid waste to his mother and father when they were ripped from the ghetto. Only the boy survived the train to the workstation. That's what they called the workstation. The boy knew better than to take them at their word. He was demoralized, and his self-destruction had only just begun. But he would not give this soldier the satisfaction of seeing him cry. He felt the blood swell in his mouth and swallowed its warmth. Still, he would not cry. The force tugged at the gravity of the rock as it licked the flames of the sun's rays and scattered it off toward a different orbit. One in the direction of the blue planet on the reversed horizon. Aaron Degerick was born at 10:30 on a Thursday. The year was 1984. Her mother lay dying while she was nursed by the staff at the children's hospital. Aaron would never be told of circumstances that befell her dearest for 13 years. By then, she had already embraced another. But this moment, existing only as an imagined scenario, would be all she would have to hold on to. Over her remaining teenage years, she would imagine her mother, especially as she would reach the age in which she would be permanently remembered. The age of 19 was an important one, her mother's final age. The moon came into a vision for the rock that was shrinking by every mile as it accelerated. By meteor standards, its debilitating speed would be perceived as odd by the NASA scientists, who would spot its trajectory in the next 43 days. Their calculations would prove the rock would pose no threat as it entered the Earth's atmosphere, which was an event deemed not to occur for some time. Maybe 40 years, maybe 4. Too hard to tell at this distance with the light samples too unclear. Erin turned 37 years old jobless, having lost her partner to another 3 days earlier, on the brink of bankruptcy and in need of hope. As she approached her middle age in a state of loneliness, she spent her nights contemplating her moves, her career prospects, her health and well-being. She took up night jogging as a hobby to battle the buildup of depression that was irking its way into her psyche, not to regain a sense of fitness, but to quash the rise of negative energy that permeated during the daylight hours. After 2 weeks of 4 nights of continuous running, she believed she had taken a turn to handle the bad fortune she was experiencing. Her progress willed her to endure. The blue ocean came into clear view as the rock beamed down from above the surface of the earth. The atmosphere began a swell of flame against what was left of the object. tearing apart the remaining elements of dust and rock chunks until there was only a baseball-sized entity left to pass over the night sky and flame out completely, ending its journey and fulfilling its destiny, the search for nothingness after having been. Balance restored. Erin paced the cricket ground of her local park for 33 minutes at 11:58 in the late evening. She was pushing her legs to their limit, her running experiments having taken place over the course of a month and a half. Now when she held her breath and paced on the grass, she was drenched not from tears, but from sweat. Her body pushes her mind into conceiving other possibilities than dread. She would wake up in the morning with no immediate change to her circumstances. No job, no love, no money, no friends, and barely a place to stay save for the couch offered her by a distant relative on a modest IOU promise of rent when she regained her feet. The difference was that she felt the progress of her runs and knew she would be able to accomplish an outcome that would change her circumstances. She didn't know what change would look like, but she knew that not only was it possible, it was inevitable. She looked to the heavens and let the sweat drip from her hair and flicker off her eyelids. Looking up to the sky helped remove the drips from her vision. As quick as lightning in the almost midnight darkness, the rock that had traveled many a millennium to die in a blaze of glory ripped itself apart in front of her very eyes. The image lasted fractions of a second, but her memory of the event lived on into the next day. It is a common occurrence for viewers of the night sky, but Erin was no such observer. She had witnessed this rock's death by chance. This was not inevitable, it was fortuitous. She continued to run for another 30 minutes, thinking and remembering what she had witnessed that no one else had, that everyone had been asleep for.
For more stories of fact-based fiction, head to jimmins.substack.com.